Yeah, so it's a pretty nice day today. Rihanna, are you ready? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we're all good.
Okay, perfect.
Be
So can we just
recording.
start off? Yeah, okay, perfect. So can you talk a little bit about yourself, like what you do at Waterloo? I know we talked a little bit about this before, but I'm
Yeah.
just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, my name is Laura Gordon, and I'm a national recruiter for the University of Waterloo. So I was chatting a little bit earlier about how normally my job at this time of year is I'm lucky enough to travel across Canada from coast to coast, meeting with students like yourselves. Sometimes that's at the university fairs that you might have seen at your high schools or other high schools before. Sometimes it's visiting classes for or schools for kind of smaller group presentations where students at your school might come out and hear a little bit more. And sometimes it's for information sessions. So for example, I usually host a big info session in Calgary kind of at the end of October each year. And then of course, connecting with students over email, answering questions that way. But I'm also a graduate of Waterloo, I'll mention that. I graduated from a program called Honors Arts and Business, and I majored in French. And I'm currently a master's student at Waterloo as well. So definitely enjoyed my time enough to continue my education there.
Oh, that's really nice. So like talking about Waterloo, in your view, what makes it unique? Why Waterloo?
Yeah, well, there are a few things, and I think everyone kind of comes to Waterloo for different reasons. And actually, I should have mentioned earlier, I'll just share my pronouns. I use she, her pronouns. Yeah, reasons why students come to Waterloo. I think one of the biggest reasons is for our cooperative education program. So we are the world's leader in co-op. We have the largest cooperative education program of its kind. And if you're wondering what I mean when I say co-op, because I know various high schools across Canada kind of offer their own versions of co-op too. Basically, it is paid work experience that you get through your degree. So a co-op program at Waterloo is a little bit different from a typical program in that you get, it takes one extra year. So you'd be in a 5-year program instead of a 4-year program, but you get up to 2 years of work experience as you go. Students typically earn anywhere between $8,000 and $18,000 per work term, and they do 4 or 5 or 6 work terms. So that's anywhere between $32,000 and $90,000 or over $100,000 even, if I'm doing my math correctly, as you go through your degree, plus you graduate with all those employability skills that come along with it. So co-op is one reason. I think another reason is that it is a great blend of academics as well as extracurriculars. For me, I found that Waterloo was a really comfortable place to step out of my comfort zone. I was definitely very academically focused in high school, and I got to keep that up at Waterloo, but I also got to discover all kinds of different kind of social aspects of university life that I wasn't really thinking about so much when I was in high school.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you for that thorough introduction. I was just wondering, how has your application process changed since COVID? So in relation to maybe expectations for extracurriculars, marks inflation, stuff like that.
Yeah, great question. So our application process is the same. So students would still apply through the Ontario University's application center. And then within a couple of weeks of submitting their applications, they would receive a confirmation email indicating next steps, which includes setting up a Waterloo Quest account and filling in your admission information form. I would say it is still like any other year in terms of grades and extracurriculars, in that we're always comparing to the average of our applicant pool. So, if grades are a little bit higher among all of our applicants this year, it's typically going to be across the board. If there is less extracurricular experience this year, it's everyone is affected by this worldwide pandemic, right? So the average amount of extracurricular experience is a little bit lower across the board as well. So we're not going to compare applicants to previous year standards. It's still going to be compared to your peers if you do apply to the University of Waterloo. I know a lot of students are kind of thinking, you are a very unique group of individuals in that no class before you has experienced anything quite like this, and hopefully no class after you will either. But you are kind of all in this together, right? So when we're comparing students, we are still able to kind of compare apples to apples in terms of the grades that you've got and the experiences that you've got in the year that you've gone through.
Thank you. And So do you know if schools are being conducted in situ or out situ this year?
Like our courses in person?
Yes.
That sort of thing. Yeah. So at Waterloo, it is a little bit of a mix, but the vast majority of our courses are online, and all first year courses are online. Since we, have so many students coming from all across Canada and all over the world to the University of Waterloo, and there were a lot of travel restrictions in place. And it still wasn't necessarily safe to have that many students on campus at the same time. We made a decision in kind of early spring to transition online. So last year, or the students who started at Waterloo this fall were able to know before they decided whether to accept their offer to Waterloo what the fall was going to look like, and we'll likely have a plan for the same communications to go out next year in terms of whether classes will be online, in person, or a blend of the two. But one of the nice things about transitioning online is that at Waterloo, we've actually been teaching courses online for over 25 years. So we already had the infrastructure in place to be able to transition courses online, which was kind of a saving grace for such a sudden shift to online learning across the board. But it meant that so many of our faculty and staff were already ready to kind of get the ball rolling in that transition to online, as well as they were already equipped to teach in that kind of new learning environment. And for those who hadn't had experience in teaching online before, we have a Center for Teaching Excellence on campus that was great in helping our faculty transition. And from personal experience, having taken a course over the winter, which suddenly transitioned online, I was really, really impressed, and have been impressed ever since, by the attention that professors have paid to students, recognizing that it is such a challenging time. In the winter, my professor reached out to all of us regularly to acknowledge that it was a difficult time and ensure that we were still on track with our assignments. And I've continued to just kind of see that dedication among our faculty to ensure that students have the supports that they need in place, and aren't having undue stress put on them because of our new learning formats.
Thank you for that. I think it's March offered an interesting trial period. So going into this year, especially for a lot of our teachers, they were able to kind of adjust accordingly, having a little bit of experience with it in March.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So how do you maintain community during online learning? Is there a spirit days? Because I know for our school, we're actually having a spirit week this week. So when you join your Zoom call, you're expected to kind of wear the school merch.
Yeah, that's so nice to hear. And I think there have been a lot of different ways that this has gone on. So I had my last class of the year last week. And so my classmates and I stuck around afterwards and gathered in a Zoom room and played some What Do You Meme, or the online version, and played Among Us and that sort of thing. So those kind of connections within classes, I think, are taking place. And even just the platforms that we're using allow us to have like group messaging and direct messaging during class as well. So we can say like, oh, did you hear that point? Are you getting this concept, and that kind of thing. But a lot of the kind of existing groups that were also in place have transitioned online. So many of our student clubs were already kind of had spaces available on Facebook or other social platforms, and they're continuing to kind of do that. And then separate from that, for students who are on campus, we have limited athletics facilities open and like activities available. But then a lot of those athletics events have shifted online as well. So although we don't have, sports leagues and we don't have our varsity teams playing, we do have like yoga and Pilates and dance classes that you can take online. So that's kind of helping with students with their physical and mental wellness throughout the fall as well. Yeah, I mean, I think we're all kind of doing what we can to reach out and build community. It definitely takes a little bit more effort on the individual end to reach out when you need some extra support or some extra connection. So that might be a barrier to many students, but I think it's one of the unfortunate effects of this time is that some students will find it more challenging to take that step forward. But for those who do find that challenging, I encourage you to take the time to do it, because it can really, help with your wellness down the road and help you to build some of those connections.
Definitely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
almost forgot to unmute my mic. So like on the topic of wellness and all that, you know, like everything stress and stuff like that. Are there any like specific resources for like mental health and suicide, like outside of COVID and during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's so unfortunate to think that those resources are needed, but on the other hand, you know, mental health challenges are a perfectly normal part of not only going through university, but life in general. So I think it's great that you ask about those resources because it's so important that students are aware of them. And we definitely have had those in place pre-COVID, and we've transitioned them online very quickly during COVID as well. In addition to recognizing that more mental health resources than ever before are needed. And so we've actually added some additional counselors for students of specific ethnicities, as well as for students who are out on co-op terms. They previously didn't have specific dedicated supports, but recognizing that there are kind of unique challenges to students while they're on co-op terms, we do have additional co-op counseling in place. And I believe we have over 30 full-time counselors at the university and close to 40 now. So on the kind of mental wellness side of things, we are really, really doing what we can to acknowledge not only the fact that every student is facing challenges right now, but also that many students are facing really unique challenges. So offering them the specific supports they need whenever possible.
Yeah, so from what it hears, it's like very easy to get support and very easy. And like in terms of support, like for new students, like let's say I'm going to Waterloo next year, what's it like? Like what do you like, what would you recommend for the transition and how would you do it?
Yeah, my number one tip is I'm so sorry that you get so many emails, but it's so important that you read them. And that's kind of, you know, regardless of which university you end up at, all of the most critical information is communicated via email. And so it might be, you know, reading through those emails will allow you to kind of establish what resources are available to you. But at Waterloo, for example, we had a program called Waterloo Ready, which was sort of like an orientation transitioning program, but rather than just being 1 week, I believe it was focusing on kind of a 6-week period to help students prepare. And that's really just letting them know about all of those different resources that are available, whether it's the mental health or physical health supports or the other kind of mentorship opportunities and academic resources available within our student success office, as well as those social aspects. So we talked about, you know, having to maybe step outside of your comfort zone a little bit more than normal in order to take advantage of those various or make those social connections rather. But the way you learn about all those different ways to connect with students is through these transition programs like Waterloo Ready that we offer. So especially after you receive an offer or accept an offer to a university, make sure you keep an eye on those emails because they kind of get increasingly important as you begin or prepare to start your university education.
Yeah, sounds very good. So like in the months preparing to university, you want to be like checking out those emails and like getting some resources. Is there ways to connect with people that are going to Waterloo? Like what did you do? I wanted to hear from that.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think back to it was quite a long time ago. So I started at Waterloo in 2006, which was like the year before Facebook became a thing, right? So for me, it was really, I knew my roommate because I received, well, actually for me, it was a friend of mine who I was living with, but we do share contact information of a future roommates. So we had a bit of an idea of what we're getting into, having contacted or toured the campus and that sort of thing. And that's kind of one way to see. But these days, there's kind of various groups that are set up usually over social channels to be able to connect. Again, that would often be communicated by your faculty ahead of time. So I know, for example, in our Faculty of Environment, they have Facebook groups set up for individual programs so that you can connect with the incoming students. And that's even before you accept your offer of admission. So you can kind of talk to some other potential future classmates. But as part of that Waterloo Ready transitional program, we did create ways for students to be able to connect with each other kind of in new and maybe a little bit more informal ways as they prepared.
Thank you for that. I know there's a lot of Instagram groups available. I look specifically at like Waterloo 2025, UBC 2025. So I think a lot of people have kind of been transitioning into meeting students that way. because that way people typically just post a personal profile or something, the picture of themselves and a little bit about themselves, and then you can private message them to
Oh,
start
that's awesome.
relationships. So yeah, I've looked into a couple of those, and it seems like a great idea.
I didn't even know those existed. So very cool. Thanks for sharing.
And moving on to the next part of our discussion is the topic of admissions. And
Okay.
I know specifically for Waterloo, you have something called the AIF. Can you please expand on that a little bit more for those who are maybe a little bit less aware about that info?
Yes, I would be happy to. This is usually one of our most asked about topics, so I'm glad you brought it up. So as you mentioned, the AIF is the admission information form, and it is a series of short answer questions about your extracurricular experiences. So where some universities might have a student profile or a personal statement, we have this AIF, and it's not meant to be anything that causes undue stress or a huge lift to fill it in or anything like that. Usually it will just take a few hours. So, I always say to students, if you take a few hours to fill this in on a Sunday afternoon, say, and it turns into, $1,000 scholarship offer down the road, it's definitely worth your while because it is optional for some programs. And so where it is optional, it's often used for scholarships decisions. For other programs, it's required. And if it is required, we will not look up at your application if you don't fill it in. So it's a kind of a firm requirement there. In the instances where it is required, you receive a score on the admission information form that's added onto your academic average in order to get an overall admissions score. So while grades are the most important factor when we're considering students, the admission information form is what what we use to compare you to other students who are within a very similar grade range to you. Outstanding extracurricular experiences could be the thing that kind of puts you over the top in order to receive an offer. And again, in those instances where it is required, it's still often used for scholarships too. It's asking about kind of your experience with clubs, sports, volunteering, part-time jobs, any awards you've won or leadership activities like this even that you've been involved with. We're basically looking for those leadership skills as well as time management skills, because we find that students who come to Waterloo with those skills under their belt are the ones who often thrive really quickly. So we're just looking to bring in, the students who are most likely to succeed at Waterloo. And so those are a couple of factors that we're looking at along the way.
Okay, thank you for that. On the topic of grades, I know Waterloo has an adjustment factor for different provinces as well as different schools. I know there's a lot of information on that relating to Ontario schools, but I don't think there's that much about Alberta schools or just other provinces in general. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so the adjustment factor that many people hear about at Waterloo is actually just specific to our Faculty of Engineering, and it's only for schools where we have kind of a statistically significant number of students coming in each year, which would usually be kind of, 5 or more or something like that. So that's likely why you see Ontario schools on that list, and perhaps only a few Alberta schools, just because, we get most of our students from Ontario. Not to say that we prefer Ontario students, we take the best students no matter where they're from. And the adjustment factor is also kind of has, I don't want to say a negligible effect, but it is definitely kind of the lowest factor relative to interview performance, the admission information form grades, and that sort of thing. And so if you do have questions about that, you can reach out to enginfo, ENGINFO, at uwaterloo.ca. That's home to our engineering, recruitment, and admissions officers, so they can share a little bit more details because they're the ones who actually kind of use that. Thanks for sharing that, Fahim. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I know some universities have a boost for certain provinces, but we don't have that at Waterloo. For us, a grade is a grade. And the one advantage that we have for students who are applying from Alberta or other provinces that have exams, and I know exams are optional this year from what I understand, rather than required as they might have been in the past for certain subjects. We will take the higher of your in-course grade or your final blended grade if you do write the diploma exam. So that's a little bit of an advantage, but I also know that many students just don't want the added stress of exams this year. So in that case, we'll just look at your in-course grade.
Thank you for that. Can you expand a little bit on the application process for Waterloo? Because I know a lot of it's a little bit different for Ontario schools as opposed to Alberta schools?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it is, I'll just reiterate in terms of how we consider students. We don't have a preference for students from Ontario. We kind of have a pool of Canadian students and permanent residents and international students and sort of spots assigned to each of those. So there's no disadvantage for applying from Alberta or anything like that. But you would apply through that Ontario University's Application Centre, or OUAC, as any student who's applying in Ontario to Ontario would know. And you'd fill out the 105 application. So that's for students who are outside of Ontario high schools. And after submitting that 105 application on the OUAC, we'd contact you in a couple of weeks and let you know how to set up your Quest account, fill in your admission information form, submit any transcripts, as well as submit an English language score if you don't fulfill the 4 years of study in an English language curriculum. So in terms of submitting your transcripts, we would ask you to directly upload unofficial transcripts to your Quest account, and you can actually upload a document every single day. So just in case you have multiple documents that you're uploading at once, you have to do one day and then one the next day. But that means that anytime you get updated grade information, you can go ahead and send that in to us. And we would need to see at least some grade information, as well as a list of all the courses that you're enrolled in by February 19th. And then after that, anytime you get more grade information up into kind of the end of April, you can submit that. So for most of our offers of admission, they would go out in the first couple of weeks of May. But for programs that have fewer required courses, we sometimes would send out admissions and decisions as early as kind of January. And that's usually if you've just got kind of the one English as a required course.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. So specifically in regards to extracurriculars, going back to the whole AIF thing,
Yeah.
is there any extracurriculars that you find tend to stand out, or that students should be participating in, specifically if they want to be going to STEM, for example?
Mm-hmm. To be honest, there's nothing in particular that we're looking for, because we know that not every student has the same opportunities available to them. So I think every student has the opportunity to get work experience or volunteer experience and to join some sort of club. But really it comes down to those two elements that I mentioned, and those are time management skills and leadership experience. So whether that is getting involved with, a religious group, or whether that is volunteering online or in person, or maybe leading a club that's related to cheese or related to your favorite sport or whatever it may be. All of those elements, I think, are equally valid interests. So I don't think that there's any one element. I would say that volunteering and part-time jobs are likely looked at with a little bit more weight than the other elements, because for the programs that require the AIF, they are usually ones that have co-op as an option within the program. So we're looking for students who have content like volunteering or work experience that would translate well to a resume. But with that being said, we do have students admitted every year who might not have any work experience. So for them, it might be a little bit more challenging to prepare for those first interviews and job applications and that sort of thing. But that's not to say that it's impossible to be admitted.
Do you know if IB or AP gives an advantage or disadvantage?
It's not an advantage in terms of admission, but it could be an advantage in terms of transfer credit for some programs. So most of our faculties do offer some sort of transfer credit. Our Faculty of Engineering is one exception, and it is kind of a program by program basis, but it could mean, you might need or might get to take fewer courses because you get transfer credit. And B, students who take AP or IB courses usually have an easier time in first year. So it might be a little bit of stress off your shoulders when you're getting those first homework assignments.
Yeah, sounds good. Like on a little bit of a different topic, there's a lot of things like math contests and like computer contests. And I know Waterloo hosts like really good ones, like the Euclid.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard that they have a bit of an adjustment on your grade. Is that true?
They
Like
do
for the
have,
math.
yeah, they have an impact on your overall admissions score for our Faculty of Math programs. So that includes math and computer science. The way it works is students have their academic average, and then they have their score on their admission information form. And then if they perform really well on the Euclid or the Canadian Senior Mathematics Contest, that could be kind of an extra few points added on to their overall admissions score. So we won't raise or lower your admissions average, but it's one item that can be kind of tacked on to that admissions score. And that's why we say it's always a good idea to write the Euclid, because it's typically not going to hurt you. It can only bring up that score that we always talk about. And the Euclid, although it's not required for admission, it is a requirement for faculty scholarships. So always a good idea, similar to the AIF, to take the time to fill that in, because it could turn into a little extra money down the road.
Mm-hmm. Is there also things like with research opportunities in terms of like these not necessarily contests, but like for math and like computer and all that stuff?
Yeah, so kind of research opportunities as a student at Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. So while this isn't something that we can guarantee students, we can't promise every incoming student the opportunity to work on a research project. The fact of the matter is that there is a ton of research going on at the university, and there are always opportunities coming up within our faculties to get some of that research experience, whether that's as a part-time job doing a research assistantship, or perhaps even a co-op term in research with a faculty member. So those are certainly available. My best advice to students who are interested in research is to get to know your professors, because when professors do receive funding to hire students for maybe co-op jobs or maybe for those assistantships, they're often going to go to the students that they know and who they know are interested in their topic, to kind of suggest that they might apply for these roles, right? So one of the things that I didn't really understand as an undergraduate student is that professors actually like getting to know students. I was always sort of like, well, they're in charge and I'm down here and I shouldn't talk to them outside of the classroom. But in my experience with profs, they really do appreciate when you take the time to get to know them. So whether that's sticking around for a few minutes at the end of a Zoom class, if we're online next fall, or walking down to their desk at the end of a lecture to chat a little bit and introduce yourself, those are great ways to kind of build those connections that could turn into research opportunities down the road.
Yeah, and I received a really good question in the chat talking about how does Waterloo offer any summer programs for high school students? Like, and would you recommend someone from like Alberta applicants for those programs?
Yeah.
Oh wait, yeah, would recommend someone from Alberta.
Yeah, to be honest, we don't actually have any summer programs for students currently. We did have one running for about 5 years or so, but we called it off as of last year. I'm hoping when things are a little bit more certain over the next year or so post-COVID, we'll be able to bring students to campus once again. But unfortunately, right now, we don't have any of those programs in place. I know there are definitely other universities in Ontario and across Canada that do, though. So if you have the opportunity to do that, I so recommend taking part in them, because it just gives you a better idea of the university experience in general. I know for me, one of the reasons I really liked Waterloo is that I got to go to a math camp when I was in grade 11, and that was sort of as a result of writing one of those math contests. I was invited to that, and for me that was really what kind of sealed the deal in terms of knowing that university was the place for me, and also putting Waterloo on the radar as one option that I looked into.
Yeah, that's really nice. Like those math camps and like these are different opportunities. Now I'm gonna go into a little bit more specific question, and it's talking about like how software engineering requires like experience in developing like well-structured like modular programs. What exactly does this mean? Like classes, or is it more like different files and like different layers like business and backend stuff like that?
So the thing is that we don't require a computer science course for our software engineering program, because not every high school offers one across Canada. But you are starting kind of at an advanced level in terms of computer science. Whereas if you go into our CS actual major program, you could take a kind of entry-level computer science course to begin with. But for software engineering, we are assuming a certain level of programming knowledge. And that could be a computer science course that you took in grade 11 or 12 at your high school if it was offered. But if not, it could be learning programming by yourself online, whether that's maybe following like an online curriculum you find, or just kind of playing around on your own. all of that is valid experience. So there's not really one specific thing that we're looking for. I find that many students applying to that program do take a CS course in high school if they can, but if not, there are still other ways of learning online.
Yeah, just before we move on, I just want to have a bit of clarification. What exactly at Waterloo is the difference between like software engineering and computer science?
Yeah. So our software engineering program basically takes our computer science program, but instead of the electives that you get along with our computer science program, you are taking engineering courses. So even though software engineering is called software, you're getting a little bit of exposure to the hardware side as well. And in general, it is an engineering program, right? So you're having to take a lot of these kind of professionally mandated courses since it's a professionally accredited program that are sort of the core education of being an engineer. So it's kind of like taking the basic elements of an engineering program and combining them with the basic elements of a computer science program.
I know
Yeah,
another,
sounds good.
I was just wondering, I know another program is the computational mathematics program. How much does that differ from CS?
That one is definitely a math major. So while you will be taking computer science courses along the way, it's really much more a Bachelor of Mathematics versus a Bachelor of Computer Science. So you're kind of looking at, it has a lot of overlap with data science in that you're looking at kind of using computers in order to deal with immense mathematical problems. But it is a Bachelor of Math versus a Bachelor of Computer Science.
Okay. Another question, sorry, going back to what we were talking about before about summer programs.
Sure.
I know, for example, there's SHAD that many students get involved in. Has that been canceled for future years, or is it just been postponed for 2020? Because I know they cut it off for 2020.
Yeah. So SHAD would actually exist. It's not specifically facilitated by the University of Waterloo, although we host students on our campus. SHAD is the organization that runs it. So I imagine, because that's been such a popular one in the past, that they will continue it in the future. And if it's on pause now, I imagine it would be temporary. And I know we'd be happy to accept future SHAD students on our campus in the future, but it'll just be a matter of connecting with that organization to see when they're up and running again.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
No problem.
I see a question in the chat. Are there any opportunities as a high school student to get involved in research as well?
We don't specifically have any partnerships with high schools as far as I'm aware. But I mean, that's not to say that we couldn't like connect you with professors at Waterloo to sort of learn about their research and that sort of thing. So I think those types of experiences are easier to set up if you already have an area of interest. And it might start with a conversation with a recruitment coordinator within your faculty of interest to kind of see what opportunities might be available to you. So while we don't have anything kind of across the board that says, you know, high school students interested in research, go here. If you connect with me via email, I could put you in touch with individuals from your faculty of interest to see what opportunities might be available kind of on a lower key level if you'd like to learn about what's out there.
Oh, thank you. And I know one of my friends, Waylan, she's involved in this thing called Eureka. So it's kind of like an opportunity to do a little bit of research specifically relating to bioinformatics. So if any of you are interested in that, definitely hit me up or hit her up, and then I'm sure she can give you a little bit more information on that. But it's kind of like an 8-week program in which people can, get a little bit more information about that stuff.
That sounds really cool. And those types of experiences are great content for things like the admission information form, or you know, the equivalents at any other universities that you're looking to apply to. So don't hesitate to take those opportunities where they come up.
Yeah, definitely. So on the topic of, again, admissions, are there any, what is this scholarship and financial aid process?
Yes. So Alberta students pay kind of standard Canadian student tuition. So we don't have out of province tuition, which is, I think, a little bit of good news. And in terms of scholarships, almost 90% of incoming students to Waterloo do receive a scholarship. And that would start at $1,000 for an 85% average and $2,000 for a 90% average, automatic, no application required. In addition to that, by filling in the admission information form for many of our faculties, you would automatically be considered for additional scholarships. By taking the time to complete that Euclid math contest, you'd automatically be considered for many faculty of math scholarships. However, many of the faculty of math ones do have additional applications as well. Our faculty of environment has many application based scholarships that have applications due in early April. So my best advice to you, and actually I can look up this website and post it in the chat here for everyone, is to check out our Student Awards and Financial Aid website for resources that are available to you. So I'll just look it up while we're chatting here. Basically, we actually have a database that you can search through. So you can type in your program of interest, the year that you're starting, and see all of the scholarships available to you, as well as the criteria for all of them. So this link that I'm posting in the chat right now is just kind of our general scholarships information. But from this page, there's a link to our awards website. And on that website, you can search that database that I mentioned. And on the page, the link that I posted there, we do have all of our first year scholarships listed.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We will definitely be posting some of these links on our website as well.
Fantastic. Sounds like a good resource.
Yeah, someone just asked me a question about like, do you need like a good grade on the Euclid to be considered for scholarships?
In order to be considered for our faculty of math additional scholarships, you would have to have a good score on either the Euclid or the Canadian Senior Mathematics Competition. So one of those two contests, but you would still automatically be considered for those entrance scholarships of $1,000 or $2,000 for our faculty, for students applying to our faculty of math, regardless of whether you do the Euclid or the CSMC or not.
Okay, makes sense. And now I'm just going to jump a little bit over to like the co-op.
Sure.
And would you mind debunking like a few myths about it? Like what it's like the likelihood of getting into like American co-ops, and like how likely is it to like, into specific jobs, etc.?
Yeah, so things are, a little bit, things are shifting a little bit right now because I think fewer students are interested in going to the States at the moment, but also B, there are more jobs transitioning online right now, but also C, sort of fewer employers are also hiring, right? So in, the pre-COVID times, we had about 1,500 students go to the United States on co-op terms each year, many of them in Silicon Valley, a lot of them in Seattle and New York and other hotspots across the country as well. Most of those jobs were in the tech sector. However, not all jobs in the tech sector are necessarily STEM jobs, right? So, every tech company does have jobs related to communications and HR and all kinds of other fields too. So that's something to keep in mind. But the majority of jobs, or I would say the biggest areas, are in Waterloo, the Waterloo region, so Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, as well as the Greater Toronto area. But then, of course, there are jobs all across Canada, including many co-op students who work in Alberta each year, as well as around the world too. So that's a little bit of an overview of where students go. Just one other thing I'll mention when it comes to co-op is I said earlier that it is a competitive interview process, so co-op is not guaranteed. In a typical year, we are looking for grades, or sorry, we have employment rates of kind of mid to high 90s. So I think it was around 98% in 2019. This year, over the summer, during the peak of the pandemic, our employment rates were about 85%. So definitely a significant drop from a typical year. However, this was about double the national average employment rate for individuals in the same age range as our students. So they're still very employable and still having really good success in finding jobs.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's very nice. I believe it'd be really nice. That's about all the questions we had ourselves. So I'm gonna move a little bit into like some of the questions that people have been asking in chat and all that. So
Awesome.
first off,
Yeah.
someone asked something about like you were talking about how the Euclid and the CSMC helps with like math department scholarships, like the higher level ones. What about like
Mhm.
the CCC and like the computer science scholarships? Do those get impacted in a certain way too?
Yeah, they're not specifically required for scholarships within the Faculty of Math, but writing them can absolutely help out your application. Excuse me. So it's again one of those things that shows us that you're someone who takes initiative and manages your time well. So if you have the opportunity to write the CCC or any other math or computing contests, even those that might not be hosted by Waterloo, I'd say it can't hurt to take the time to do them.
Thank you. Yeah, so
You're very
definitely
welcome.
getting involved in that definitely will help.
Yeah.
Another question that we have from users are expanding on the, because we mentioned a little bit about research earlier.
Yes.
So expanding on the topic of entrepreneurship programs like the Velocity Entrepreneurship Program
Yeah.
who offers. So yeah,
Just
can you
talking a little bit more.
expand on that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So Velocity started, I think it was over a decade ago now, as a residence that students could move into if they were interested in entrepreneurship, just to kind of connect with each other, start these groups that could come up with ideas, which were very frequently turned into businesses. And in fact, Waterloo has the distinction of the Canadian university that has produced the most unicorns. And by unicorns, I don't mean the mythical creature or the Starbucks beverage. It's actually businesses that have been valued at over $1 billion. So I think it's 7 Waterloo former students now have started businesses with that value. So that's pretty cool. Not all of them have come through Velocity, but many of them have over the last few years. And so while it started as a spot in residence, it then grew to be so much more than that. So we are known in the region of Waterloo for having kind of a tech incubator. And so where all of these kind of small and larger established startup companies had physical space, we got physical space for Waterloo students to start their own businesses. So kind of starts off with a desk that you can start at when your business only has maybe 3 or 4 employees, and then can grow into bigger spaces for our students to take advantage of. Then we added additional kind of garage space for students to work on hardware products. We have space on campus for students in our science or in those more kind of science related startups. And it's also grown into ideas clinics that we have available to all students at Waterloo, as well as I think starting last year, we started offering entrepreneurial supports for students in every residence and not just those ones who are living in the Velocity residence. In addition to Velocity though, we also have Greenhouse, which is located at St. Paul's University College. And this is another kind of residence incubator that is focusing specifically on social and environmental entrepreneurship. So from that organization, we have had startups that have focused on creating more networking opportunities for Black women and for selling or producing and selling more ethically sourced clothing, and lots of other really cool things that that students have put their minds to in order to, pursue those big ideas, but do it on the more kind of social and environmental fronts as opposed to more of the tech front. So some really cool stuff that's been coming out of campus. And we also have our pitch competitions each year that give away over $300,000 in funding to students too. So if you've got a big idea, we've likely got some money for you to help with it.
Thank you so much for that elaboration.
Yeah, that's very nice. So I heard you were talking a bit about biomedical, and we have someone that asked about like the possible growth and like the projected availabilities of internships and like co-ops and biomedical at Waterloo specifically, biomedical engineering.
Biomedical engineering. Okay, perfect. Just to clarify, we do have a biomedical sciences program as well, and it's one of very few programs that does not have co-op, just because most students who go into that program are looking to go on to medical school or another health field. But biomedical engineering is one of our newer engineering programs. I think it's been around for about 8 years or so now, and certainly a growing field. I think, especially in the last 9 months or whatever it may have been, we've seen an increasing importance in developing technologies that can quickly adapt to changing environments or circumstances in the medical field. So while I don't have any particular kind of data-driven insight into the field of biomedical engineering or the job opportunities or career demand out there right now, I would say just based on observation, I think this is likely going to be a high demand field for quite a while to come, whether it's developing technologies for masks that can more effectively filter potentially dangerous things in environments, or producing respirators at a lower cost and a higher volume than they've done in the past. But I mean, some other examples of things that students can do within this program would be kind of creating potentially robotic devices for individuals with mobility needs, or targeted drug delivery systems to, perhaps if there is a stronger treatment developed for COVID-19 in the near future, it could be biomedical engineers who kind of figure out how to administer that drug and all kinds of other stuff.
Thank you for that. I know a specific population, it's really helpful to get into biomedical engineering.
Definitely. And it is one of our most competitive programs. I'll sort of share that warning for anyone who's interested in it. We do look for usually a mid-90s average for admission to that program, but we would consider students in the low 90s and above. So strong grades plus strong extracurriculars is kind of the recipe for success in that program.
Yeah, sounds good. Like it's very apparent their usage in like times like COVID and all that stuff. And like, I'm just gonna go into another question. Someone asked about how are IB grades like out of 7 converted into like percentages in terms of Waterloo?
Yeah, so our admissions team takes care of that. So they have their own series of charts that basically has the equivalencies in a percentage grade. I know IB grades tend to translate favorably when we convert them to a percentage grade, but that's all kind of handled by our admissions department. So you could always follow up with our admissions department if you wanted to know a little bit more about that. I'm just putting their email address in the chat here. It's myapplication@uwaterloo.ca, and that would put you in touch with the individuals who actually process those applications. It kind of depends on how we receive grades though. Sometimes we receive them as a final score or predicted score out of 7, but if your school does submit it to us as a percentage grade, then we would use that when we calculate your admissions average.
Thank you. I know specifically.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
I know 7 typically ranges between like 96 and 98, and then a 6 is typically a 90 to 96, and then a 5 tends to be a 90. So I think it kind of goes in increments like that. So it's about 6% for each number. But yeah, definitely contact the admissions team to get more information.
They're the experts.
Yeah. Okay, next question. So as far as the architecture program admissions process, are there, and the experience of an architecture student on the Cambridge campus, what would you consider to be a good profile? So, because I know a lot of the time they expect a little bit of a portfolio. So what would you think would be a good profile?
Yeah, and I could talk a little bit about how the admissions process works for that faculty in general. So essentially, we start off by looking at students' grades and their admission information form. And based on that information, we will invite typically 500 or 600 students for interviews. And those interviews would normally be in person, although for out-of-province students, we've always been able to do them online. And I suspect for this spring, it's all going to be online once again. And if you're invited for an interview, you will also be asked to write an English Précis test, which is a test of your ability to summarize an academic article, as well as submit a portfolio. So there is no single element that we're looking for in a portfolio. We want to see your unique creativity. And for some students, that has come across as everything from performing a dance piece to bringing in furniture that they built to submitting a more traditional portfolio of kind of paintings and sketches and that sort of thing. I think one thing that is helpful is to show evidence of process work. If that I think that's easier to do for something like a a sketch than it is to do for something like a piece of music. But if you are able to incorporate that, it kind of shows us how you, your process, and that's helpful for us getting to know the way you think and the way you work and that sort of thing. But we will have more information about that available to students who are selected for an interview in the early winter. I think it's February that we reach out to our selected architecture applicants, but that's a little bit to go off of for now.
Okay, thank you so much. And in relation to this idea of portfolios, do you know how creating workshop movie props, machines, programs will affect your AIF? Are they looked favorably upon in comparison to maybe employment and volunteering, or would?
Yeah, again, that is all good content. So it's, I imagine that if you're making movie props or machines or whatever it may be, you know, maybe you're just making those for fun, which is awesome. Or maybe you're making them for a school play or some other kind of community project. So all of that is great. Again, it shows us that you take a lot of initiative. It shows us that you can do that do these things that take up a significant portion of your time, I imagine, while also, you know, achieving these strong grades. So that's definitely some great content, as well as some fairly unique content. So it might be something that our admissions officers kind of look at twice to say, oh, that's kind of cool, something I haven't seen so frequently before.
Thank you. Just thought I'd open this up to anyone else who has any more questions.
Yeah, and I do see a comment about grade cutoffs. So that's great that Rihanna has shared the link to our admission requirements page. By selecting that, or by going to that link and then selecting your province as well as your program of interest, you will see the minimum admissions average. So if you achieve those minimum admissions averages, that means we would consider your application. For some programs, that minimum is where we admit most students, but for others where it says individual selection, it means it's the minimum to look at your application, but we're going to look at other elements like the admission information form or potential video interviews depending on your program as well. So just to clarify a little bit, we don't necessarily have cutoffs at Waterloo because we have to wait until we see the applicant pool before we can decide what our admissions averages will be.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you, I think there's a question. So what are some things you would recommend high school students do to prepare to apply to Waterloo?
To prepare to apply to Waterloo? Yeah, great question. So, you know, this could be for a grade 12 student or a younger student, is to start to think about what experiences you have that might translate well to an admission information form. But also think about what experiences you have that might translate to a resume down the road too. Because if you are considering going to Waterloo for a co-op program, or you know, any other university or post-secondary institution that offers similar work integrated learning in their programs, it's so important for you to be able to talk about your skills and your experiences, and to be able to really kind of pitch yourself as a candidate for maybe a job or a leadership role or whatever it may be. So that would be my main advice for students, kind of regardless of which institution you're looking at applying to, is if you intend to work one day, and I know that might not be the route for everyone, maybe some individuals want to go into research or other fields, it's great to start thinking about those things earlier, because it will make the resume development process a little bit easier down the road.
Thank you. I think it's always something to keep in the back of your mind, you know, thinking where is it that you want to be headed and what kind of activities and things you should get involved in.
Yeah, and also looking at your experiences might help you to figure out some of those things, like where your main interests lie, but you can also figure it out along the way. You don't have to know in grade 12.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I quickly got a question from someone in the chat. They were asking if the interview process is advantageous for fields where the interview is optional. Like, do people that do them get like an advantage, or like better than people that don't?
Yeah, so we don't require it, from what I remember, for our engineering program. So where it is an option, it's the kind of thing where if you do it, it's a little bit like the Euclid math contest. If you do it, then you can get points added to your score. If you don't do it, then you're leaving points on the table. And for our most competitive programs, you really don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you're leaving points on the table, right? So that's why we always strongly recommend completing all of the required and recommended elements of an application. I think the only way an interview could hurt you is if you say something super offensive or anything like that, which I don't imagine you're going to do. But that sort of thing really just shows us that you're taking the time to do it. And we're also just looking to sort of measure your communication skills and your ability to express yourself and that sort of thing, because there's so much group work involved in those engineering programs, as well as co-op being a big part of it. You are going to have to go through many interviews. So we're looking to bring in students who could do well in those circumstances.
Always good practice.
Definitely.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I think it's nice for like stuff like interviews. And then there's also a question about do you look at like averages of all courses or only like certain ones?
Good question. So we are going to look at your top 5 30 or 31 level courses, including the required ones. So where you are, say, an arts or an applicant to many of our environment programs where English is the only required course, we'll look at that, and then your 4 highest. If you're applying to an engineering program where there are 5 required courses already, we're just going to look at those 5. However, for engineering, if you have a 6th course that will bring up your average, then we'll include it in your overall admissions average as well. That's just because we use 6 courses for Ontario students. So we want to give Alberta students that advantage of having a 6th course as well. If it does help their average, if it doesn't, we'll just look at the 5. And was there a second part to that question? Or was it just about grades and how we calculate the admissions average?
That's all I got.
Okay, perfect.
I wasn't really sure either, but that's all I got.
Okay, Kingsley, do you have any more questions?
I don't think so.
I will ask W's question, or I think that's his name or their name. So basically, I think they're asking how does your portfolio and extracurriculars and the AIF weigh in comparison to grades? Because I know at, for example, UBC, it's kind of 50-50. So just wondering how that would work for Waterloo.
Yeah. So it's definitely grades are the bigger proportion of the overall admission score. However, we do look for kind of a minimum amount of experience on the admission information form. So in the example you gave of a student who has a 99 average versus a student who has a 90 average, that student with a 99 average, if they don't have any real experience on their admission information form, they might not receive an offer of admission. Whereas a student with a 90% average, if they do meet the minimum for consideration for the program, so for some engineering programs, they might need higher than that even to be considered, but for most, a 90 would at least get you consideration. The extracurriculars is really where it's sort of their time to shine relative to other applicants. So if it's just sort of, low end of the scale for grades and average extracurriculars, that might not be enough to get an offer. But if it's low end of the scale for grades and outstanding extracurriculars, that could get you into the program over a student who might have slightly higher or maybe even significantly higher grades for you, depending on that other student's experience.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I just got one last minute question about this. It's about if you don't have like grade 12 courses in like your top 5 courses, is it okay to put like grade 11 courses?
So we're only ever going to look at grade 12 courses when we calculate your overall admissions average. The exception would be if you're in a quadmester system and one of the required courses is in the last quadmester, then we would sub in the grade 11 equivalent grade, but it would be conditional on a final grade 12 mark in the required course, which is usually at least 70 or 75%, as well as the overall admissions average. So you don't choose which courses you use in your admissions average. Our admissions officers will do that, and they're always going to do that in order to give each student kind of the greatest advantage possible, based on our admissions policies. So they know how to select courses in order to do that.
Thank you for that. So I guess just to wrap it up, what is your favorite part about attending Waterloo?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say two experiences in particular stood out for me. One was that I think when I came to Waterloo, I was expecting to get a great education, and I really feel like I got that. So that was sort of the table stakes of my Waterloo degree. But the two things that I really, really loved about my experience were living in residence, because I mentioned that Waterloo is a place where academically minded students tended to go, but it's also a place where we have so many different people with so many unique interests that it's very easy to kind of explore different aspects of your own personality and discover new interests and that sort of thing. And living in residence was the place where I really got to do that. So that was one of my favorite things about Waterloo. And then the other awesome element was the cooperative education program, because it allowed me to earn money to pay for my degree as I went. I had to have some savings and some student loans and that sort of thing along the way, but it definitely allowed me to graduate with more, like, in a better financial spot than I would have been if I hadn't done it. And it also really motivated me to go out and find work after I graduated, and I knew how to do that because of the co-op program, and let me try out different jobs and figure out what I liked and what I didn't like, and what careers I never knew existed before, like traveling across Canada virtually or in person, and talking to students like yourselves, which I very much enjoy doing. So those are the two best things about Waterloo in my experience.
Thank you so much, Laura, for being here. I think that wraps up our interview for today. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to contact Laura. I think Brianna has put her email in the chat, as well as our email, which is info@thecareereffect.live. And of course, you can find other resources on the Waterloo page.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this. I think it shows such great initiative that you as a group of students took the time to set this up. And for our attendees, thank you for taking some time out of your Sunday afternoons to come and learn more about Waterloo. It warms my heart to know that you were interested and willing to sit down with me this afternoon.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. We know how busy you are.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone, and stay safe over the holidays.
You as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes our email or our session. Thank you everyone for being here.